For a lot of kids in Morton, one of the highlights of a drizzly autumn day was the moment that they heard the chimes of the ice cream van. The music, always over-amplified to a tinny, fuzzed-out blur, and always some xylophone or piano tune of a nursery rhyme or a well-known jingle, cut through the evening air like a clarion call, immediately calling every child in the vicinity to rush in and beg their parents for a few coins to spend on a Comet, a 99, a Screwball, or a Mr. Whippy. I know because until 1997, I was one of those kids, eager for a treat and tugging at Mom's pant leg, whining the word please as if I'd never been fed in my life. After 97, though, everything changed. After that, it took a long time before I would ever eat from an ice cream truck van, and even now the sound of the chimes makes me nervous. Without a doubt, there is something decidedly odd about the appearance and even the existence of ice cream vans in a place like Morton. Up in the north, where summertime seems to last around 3 days and the rest of the time we exist under a slate gray sky and endure constant bombardment of rain and drizzle, ice cream would seem like the last thing you'd want in your wind-chilled hands. When the colorful painted van, with its vivid splashes of pink and white, turns the corner, looking as out of place as a rainbow in the night sky, it looks incongruous, out of place, and even slightly surreal. Yet when those chimes ring, kids react as if on instinct, and for the next 10 minutes or so, the only thing that any child wants in the world is an ice cream. Cold be damned. I remember the first time I brought a friend from abroad to Morton. I watched his face, a picture of stunned amusement as he watched the crowds of red-nosed children, wrapped in scarves and woolly hats, traipsing through a dusting of snow in order to queue up for an ice cream cone. To him, it was a bewildering sight. To an extent, I could see why. The thing with Sylvester actually started in '96. Mr. Sylvester, as we called him, even though Sylvester was his first name, was a new ice cream man in the area, and every night he would do a circuit of Moulton Town, a few of the surrounding neighborhoods, and the Marston estate. The thing is, like a lot of the ice cream vans back in the day, Mr. Sylvester sold a lot more than ice cream. The previous ice cream man, who we knew as Vincenzo Soft, but whose real name was Bill Rummage, used to park outside the school gates at 3:30 p.m. to catch the crowds of kids with leftover dinner money as they left through the school gates on their way to the bus. He was moved on from this spot by the school itself and was eventually banned from circulating in the area by the council when it emerged that he had a sideline in selling cigarettes to teenagers and dirty magazines to some of the fathers that visited his van. In retrospect, bad as it sounds, he might have still been the better option. Unlike Vincenzo's, Sylvester's sideline was in meat. Whilst this may sound odd to some, the idea of selling cheap, fell off the back of a lorry cuts of meat far cheaper than the local butchers or the supermarket was quite a lucrative and oddly popular business. For years prior to Sylvester's arrival, the local pubs in Morton would regularly be visited by meat men, who would simply arrive with bags full of prepackaged meat that had been acquired from supermarkets and other sources, and which they sold cheap to people whose budgets often did not allow them the more expensive cuts. Sylvester then was simply cashing in on an already established side hustle and was actually a step up from the norm, because at least his meat was refrigerated. Whilst he would sell us the usual rocket lorries and cornets from one window, Sylvester would have a separate queue for older customers queuing at the other window. Inside the van were two freezers, one filled with ice cream and a variety of other treats for the kids, and in the other, packaged steaks, hamburgers, pork chops, and beef and lamb joints, all sold at a steal of a price from the van, directly to his willing customers, at least for a while. All of that changed the day that Billy Elkers got his screwball. Billy, a horrible blonde child who seemed to always be in trouble and who most people on the estate nicknamed Snide Bill on the account of his cruel tongue and the pleasure he took in using it. He had also, for some reason, taken a huge dislike to Sylvester. Despite the fact that the old man hardly ever spoke 2 words to us kids when he served us, his interest being far more focused on his much more lucrative meat trade. Tired of waiting in line, Billy pushed to the front, shoving a young girl and her sister out of the way in a jostle to reach the front. When Sylvester saw this, he refused to serve the queue jumper and sent him to the back of the queue. Billy was livid, shouted obscenities, and even spat at Sylvester, who threw back a few obscenities of his own. However, unlike most kids who would have just given up on the ice cream for the day and gone home, snide Billy actually did go to the back of the line, queue up, and wait to be served a second time. When he finally got to the counter, he made some dig at Sylvester about his lazy eye and ordered a screwball, without saying please or thank you, and speaking to the old man as if he was something that he had just scraped off his shoe. Sylvester remained calm throughout this and handed over the ice cream, though we could all tell he was taking the money with gritted teeth. It was around 10 minutes later that we heard Billy screaming. For those who have not heard of it, a screwball is a particular type of British ice cream cup. It is basically a plastic cone with a small spherical tip. The cone is filled with raspberry ripple ice cream, and once you dig to the bottom and finish that, there is a small bubblegum ball at the bottom wedged into the spherical space at the tip. For a kid, the idea that you would get ice cream and a free bubbly was massively appealing, and screwballs were, and presumably still are, a popular choice. Though not with me or any of the others gathered there that day. Hearing Billy's screams, we all ran over to see what was the matter. I remember someone shouting that Sylvester poisoned him. That wasn't the case, but it wasn't far off. Billy was sitting on the ground, his eyes staring blankly and mouth hanging open. In one hand, he had the tiny plastic spoon that came with the ice cream, from which melted goo was slowly spilling. In the other, the plastic cup that the ice cream came in. Then, with a wet lip gibbering, he said, "There's an eyeball in it. He put an eyeball in it." Sure enough, in the space at the bottom of the screwball, where the bubblegum ball was supposed to go, an eyeball, swollen and bloody at one end, a clotted gel of nerves and tendrils still attached to the underside, stared up. I remember that the iris of the thing was blue, which made it look more horrifically like a human eye. Billy threw it down and vomited immediately. One in our group ran to tell the grown-ups, and the offending item was soon scooped up and taken into evidence. What happened next is a bit of a blur. Sylvester was reported to council, and despite his protestations that screwballs come pre-packaged and that he could not have interfered with the packet, the fact that the eyeball was apparently identified as a cow's eye and that he had been selling beef from the other side of the van looked very incriminating. He was banned from selling ice cream in the area and faced the threat of prosecution for his illegal and unmonitored meat-selling activities. His response baffled everyone. Rather than simply disappearing or fighting his case in court, Sylvester instead offered to leave on the provision that he was given a huge lump sum payment of £5,000 by the council to do so. When the council obviously refused with no small amount of laughter, Sylvester replied with another letter. This one only had a single word printed across it: Hamlin. He was dismissed as a fool, and the court proceedings against him began in earnest. Despite the ban, however, the chimes of Sylvester's van were heard across Morton a week later, though not at their usual time. I mentioned earlier that the appearance of the ice cream truck and the grayed-out banality of some urban settings looks out of place and oddly unsettling. This counts doubly when the van is slowly cruising and chimes are rung at night. I remember being woken up by the clang of those tiny high-pitched chimes, like a child's music box, played at half the speed. They sang out the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel in clunky, harsh-sounding notes over the tanny fixed to the van. I checked the clock on the bedside table, 12:17 a.m. Saying the words along with timing of the tune sounded hideous. So slowly was it played that the words sounded drawled and pulled, as if spoken by someone having some kind of attack. "Half a pound of tunpenny rice, half a pound of trestle." At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the noise went on and on. I remember getting out of bed, walking to the window and looking out, wondering what in the hell Sylvester was doing coming around the state at that time of night. What I saw was not just the van, but a trail of children behind. Mix it up and make it nice. Pop goes the weasel. There were at least 20, all under the age of 12 with not a parent in sight. They were marching in procession, a long line of barefooted kids in patterned pajamas, marching slowly as if memorized by the sound of the ice cream man's call. After a second, screams were heard and doors flung open as parents, roused by the sound, realized that their little ones were no longer tucked up safe in their beds, but had left the home and were now following the ice cream truck, to who knew where. Suddenly the word Hamlin written on the note made sense. I thought back to the tale of the Pied Piper of Hamlin, who played his flute to lead all the rats out of the city, and having been refused payment, played his flute again to lead the children out of town, hypnotized by its tune out of the village and away, never seen again. As the number of parents scooping up their still marching children increased and a few broke away to beat on the back and sides of the van, the music stopped and the van hurriedly sped away. The message, however, was clear. I can take your kids anytime I like. The kids remembered nothing. To them, the whole thing was like a dream. As a teenager at the time, I was unaffected, at least by the tune. The vision of what I saw the tune do, however, stayed with me for years. The threat implied in this action, that with this tune, his van or whatever means he used, he could lead away children anytime he liked, was a horrible thought, and for the next 10 years no ice cream vans of any kind were allowed in or around Morton or the surrounding areas. For many of the parents, the jangly sounds of those music box chimes was enough to make their skin crawl. As for Sylvester, we were never quite sure what happened to him. Certainly, we never saw him again. Though whether he left voluntarily or as a far wealthier man courtesy of the council, we'll never know. Just as we'll never know exactly where he got those cheap cuts of meat that we all happily ate. Some things, perhaps, were better not known.